Let's talk now to Daniel Levy, the former advisor to the Israeli government. He's now president of the Independent Policy Institute, the US Middle East Project. Daniel, welcome. Good to see you. If this peace agreement does come into force, your thoughts first on getting here and the significance of these crowded hours.
Jamie, if I may, let's not call it a peace agreement. It's a ceasefire deal. It's very much not a peace agreement. This is perhaps a vista towards ending this horrendously bloody last 15 months of particular conflict in Gaza. But it's very important that you draw attention to this crowded next few hours and days. Sunday still seems an awfully long way away, doesn't it? So where we are, it's now become transparent, something that many of us had seen and called out and analysed for many, many months, which is that the obstacle to this deal was the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, and his calculations, which were narrow domestic political, his governing coalition, which we see straining now against this backdrop. And there were other reasons Netanyahu wanted to continue with this. He has tried to reinvent himself as a wartime leader. He has ideological goals when it comes to Gaza. We were told by the Biden administration, by Secretary Blinken and others, that the one obstacle to a deal was Hamas. You know, sometimes diplomacy requires constructive ambiguity. When it goes into outright deceit and falsehoods, and those falsehoods undermine diplomacy, something is wrong. And unfortunately, something was terribly wrong with the Biden administration's handling of this. That's why the same deal that was available in May is now only happening as a result of, I would call it, Jamie, the Trump trepidation factor. It's not that Trump has come in and read the riot act to Netanyahu, but Netanyahu sees someone who may act like the leader of a superpower rather than someone he can wrap around his finger, which was the Biden administration. Netanyahu doesn't want to be here. And therefore, the second crucial thing to say at this point is that Netanyahu will look for ways of getting out of this, because that aligns with his domestic political survival. These are going to be a tense next, not only 2 days and the hours, and we've seen the destruction. We've seen 100+ Palestinians. Your correspondent Rami was talking about the situation there, killed since the announcement. One can expect that to continue. One can expect, even if we begin implementation, which I think is now likely to happen, that the provocations will be relentless. This is going to be very fragile indeed.
That sounds like a rather gloomy prognosis. What do then the next few months look like in Gaza?
I wish I could say there's a half full cup. There isn't, but there is the following. There is the fact that if this is implemented, for at least the period of implementation, Palestinians in Gaza will no longer face daily mass civilian killings at the hands of these IDF bombings. You will see the Israelis held in Gaza, the hostages, many of them returning home alive. Finally, some respite for those families. You also see Palestinians, often held for decades, often held in detention without trial in Israeli prisons, being released. And you will hopefully see, and this is some of the challenges ahead in the implementation, you will hopefully see those other aspects, Palestinians being able to return, I would say, to their homes in other parts of Gaza, but those have been destroyed, but at least returning to areas that will be less crowded, where they can maybe begin to rebuild a life. You will see the Israeli army beginning to redeploy out of Gaza. And crucially, and just mentioned, you will see the massive ramping up and finally the allowing into Gaza by Israel of the humanitarian aid and assistance, which, let's be clear, should never have been prevented in the first place. That's one of the reasons why Israel's leadership has arrest warrants issued against them by the International Criminal Court. But one can expect also on this front for Israel to nickel and dime, in other words, to try and string out and make as hard as possible the implementation also of that humanitarian assistance. One of the things we see, and we should keep a close eye on, is that the UN agency, which works with Palestinian refugees, many of whom expelled from Israel at the creation of Israel in the Nakba, it works UNRWA, which is that agency, which is the only agency that can really see the provision of much of this assistance, is under assault by Israel, has had its funding withdrawn by America and some craven European governments. So we're going to have to see whether UNRWA can fulfill its mandate. Lots of bumps on the road, and that's before we even speak, Jamie, of the fact that this isn't something that began 15 months ago, right? We still have those core issues of will we ever see Palestinians accorded their rights, not living under an occupation and what the International Court of Justice has described as an apartheid regime. So we are very much still in the heart of a conflict, but we are hoping for some respite for people who desperately need it.
Daniel, good to talk to you. Thank you for that. Daniel Levy, the former advisor to the Israeli government.